Okay, with that, we will go to item last, which is House File 906. I will move House File 906 so that it is before the committee. And you should have some house research information. There's a letter from Smoke Free Generation, and there are no amendments. Okay, so with that, I will move House File 906. A very simple bill. What it does is it says that basically freezing the inflator on tobacco. And with that, first of all, just see a lay of the land here. Is there anyone that wish to testify with concerns on the bill? Anyone wish to testify in support of the bill? Does the department wish to testify? I'll think about it. Okay. If we could please have a Mr. Carr and a Mr. Rush come down, and since there's no one to testify with concerns, there'll be limited testimony if possible, and then we will bring the department up so they can share their broad support for House File 906. Okay, so please state your name and who you represent for the record, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Brian Carr. I'm the Government Relations Director and Legal Counsel at the Minnesota Retailers Association. We are a statewide trade association consisting of small, Main Street, regional, and national retailers. Today, I want to voice our support for your bill, Mr. Chair, House File 906, that has bipartisan support. Included in your packet is a list of organizations supporting this bill. This legislation would remove an autopilot tax increase on a legal Minnesota product. Minnesota is already the only state to assess a separate sales tax on cigarettes that adjusts annually depending on the average price of a pack. Our concern with the auto inflator is twofold, members. First, Minnesota has not one but two automatic adjustment mechanisms that are on autopilot to increase taxes on cigarettes and other tobacco products. Removing the autoflator does not roll back tobacco taxes. In fact, the bill would freeze the current excise tax and maintain one automatic adjustment rather than two. In 2013, the state excise tax increased by 130%. Minnesota now has the 7th highest cigarette tax rate in the country, and the automatic adjustment drives consumer prices up to a level that is simply uncompetitive for our retailers. This increase happens without any legislative oversight and is paid by Minnesota consumers. Secondly, in some cases, the 2013 increase resulted in tobacco product sale losses of 50% or more. The problem has been exacerbated along our borders and in greater Minnesota communities, where a recently updated economic impact study estimates more than 2,800 jobs have been lost since that 2013 increase of 130%. Minnesota is losing approximately $38 million per year in tax revenue due to lost sales from non-tobacco products. And now over 35% of all tobacco products consumed in Minnesota are brought in from other states. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, this measure was in last year's omnibus tax bill that was passed by the legislature with bipartisan support. Again, we are not asking to roll back a tobacco tax today. Our request is to simply keep the state to one mechanism to adjust taxes instead of two. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to testify.
I think we'll go to Mr. Rush, then we'll go to questions from members for both Mr. Rush and Mr. Carr. Mr. Rush.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and the members of the committee. My name is Steve Rush. I'm the Director of Government Relations for Holiday Companies. We are a family-owned Bloomington-based convenience store company. Next year, we will celebrate our 90th year of doing business. We have over 300 corporate and franchise convenience stores in Minnesota and employ over 4,200 individuals. Given the 130% increase in the excise tax in 2013 and the annual inflation adjustment, Minnesota is uncompetitive in the sale of cigarettes. In checking retail prices in the last few days, a legally sold carton of Marlboro cigarettes sells for over $85 in Minnesota, which is almost $12 higher than Wisconsin, over $20 higher than South Dakota, and almost $36 more than North Dakota. That's a lot of money. This price disparity is causing the convenience store industry to lose significant market share to bordering states. For example, we have 9 convenience stores in Duluth, and we have experienced a significant decline in sales of cigarettes. Correspondingly, our stores in Superior, Wisconsin have seen very significant sales increases. East Metro convenience stores such as Stillwater, West Lakeland, and Bayport have also seen substantial declines in sales, whereas convenience stores in western Wisconsin across from the metro areas such as St. Croix Falls and Somerset have seen significant increases in sales. Doing business in Moorhead, Minnesota in the cigarette category is virtually hopeless, with a price difference of almost $36 per carton. Our 2 stores there have had an enormous decline in cigarette sales, while Fargo, North Dakota convenience stores have experienced a very high increase in retail sales. Our store in Ortonville, Minnesota on the South Dakota border has suffered devastating sales losses. We don't have any stores on the Iowa border, but Iowa's excise tax at $1.36 per pack is lower than South Dakota's at $1.53. So I can only imagine that retailers on that border are suffering severe sales losses. A 2016 report from the Mackinac Center focused on the correlation between cigarette taxes and smuggling. Casual smuggling occurs when individuals cross border shop in another state where taxes are lower and cigarettes are correspondingly less expensive. The report concludes that Minnesota is the 5th highest level of smuggling in the nation, jumping by 11 points from the prior year. Almost 36% of all cigarettes in Minnesota are smuggled in. The report further states that the smuggling rate will continue to climb due to tying automatic cigarette tax increases to inflation. This disparity in pricing and the resulting loss of sales is staggering. On average, convenience stores rely on tobacco for about 40% of our inside sales. The annual inflation adjustment of the state excise tax will only make this problem worse. Accordingly, we respectfully request that House File 906 receive favorable approval. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Questions for members? Representative Groffel. Chairman Groffel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just, Mr. Rush, so again, carton of cigarettes from, college town of Grand Forks in North Dakota versus East Grand Forks in Minnesota. What's the differential there that you mentioned for the?
Mr. Rush.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, the price disparity for using Marlboro as an example, the most popular variety, it's about $36 difference.
So,
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman and members, so I'm not a smoker, and I know that lowering the price of cigarettes is not a top priority for many legislators. But if you don't realize the amount of bootlegging that's going on right now in the state of Minnesota from across our borders, it is there are some kids in college in North Dakota. This is their job. Mr. Rush, are you familiar with what the the limit is and the number of carton of cigarettes that can be sold at a retail establishment in North Dakota?
Mr. Rush.
Mr. Chair, Representative Garofalo, I don't know of any specific limit in the state of North Dakota.
Chair Garofalo.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman and members, so just to be clear, if a college student picks up 10 cartons of Marlboros on their way home, let's say they live in the Twin Cities and they drive down here, their gross profit is $360 just for 10 cartons of cigarettes. Even if they cut it in half, it's $180 to $200. There is, you go to any, I won't say VFW, but you go to any establishment within 100 miles of the North Dakota border right now, you can go to a sign-up sheet and you can sign up for what your order is when they run to North Dakota and buy the cigarettes. Okay, I mean, it is, we are clearly so far out of the range of this issue that we are incentivizing people to break our law, and I would just encourage members not to look at this for making tobacco products cheaper, but to understand what is actually happening in the real world today. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thanks, Chair Garofalo, but I do believe those college students would be declaring that on their tax return.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chair Knobloch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rush, what did you say the percentage of retail sales was in convenience stores that is cigarettes? Did you say 40%?
Mr. Rush.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we rely typically in our industry on about 40% of our inside sales being tied to tobacco.
Okay, I guess I didn't realize it was
Chair
that
Knobloch.
high, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Rush, and you said that you believe that 36% of the tobacco products or cigarettes sold in Minnesota are illegally here from other states? Is that what you said?
Mr. Rush?
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's based upon a Mackinac Center study that concluded that approximately 36% of all cigarettes consumed in the state are purchased elsewhere.
Thank you.
Chair Knobloch? Chair Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rush, have you guys done an analysis to see how the revenue off of cigarette taxes in North Dakota or Iowa or these other states has changed since we changed the law here in Minnesota? And maybe if you don't have that data, I don't know if our staff has that at all. Or...
Mr. Rush, do you first of all?
Mr. Chair, Representative, no, I don't have access to that data.
Mr. Clayman? Okay, Chair Anderson?
Just curious to see what the change has been.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we will go to, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Schultz and then Carlson. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have any information on how we prosecute or how we investigate this smuggling and what we're doing about this?
Who's that question for?
The testifier.
Mr. Rush?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I believe there is a limit by state law of bringing in 1 carton of cigarettes into the state of Minnesota. What level of enforcement occurs there, I do not know.
Representative Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is it beyond the power of the tobacco companies to set different prices in different states of the cartons of cigarettes? Are they allowed to do that?
Mr. Rush?
Mr. Chair, Representatives, I don't know how the tobacco companies price their product, if it's state to state or to a particular company.
Well, Mr. Rush, does Holiday Store in North Dakota pay the same per carton as Minnesota?
Chair, no, the answer to that would be no, in big part because of the difference in the excise tax rate.
Okay. Representative Schultz?
Okay, thank you. I think that we should maintain our taxes on cigarettes and the inflator because we spend a lot of money in this state on health care related to smoking. And this money, I think one of our former governors, Palenti, called it a health care user fee to pay for that difference in the outcomes to address the health issues. So if we reduce this amount, our state is going to be in trouble because we won't be able to pay for the health effects, the negative health effects that smoking has. So I oppose this bill.
Thank you, Representative Schultz. As far as the enforcement, in the past, the department has come to me and to this committee requesting several $1 million for what was termed as the smoking hot tobacco cops, if you remember that, because smuggling is becoming such a problem, and that's where we learned that if you take a Suburban and an 8x12 U-Haul, you can go to North Dakota, load them up, come back to Minnesota and sell them, kind of on what the good college student was doing on a little bigger basis, and make $1 million. The high tobacco tax in Minnesota is not reducing smoking necessarily. That's right. But now, Mr. Carr, I think, said that 35% of the cigarettes are smuggled in. Now, are they paying a use tax on that?
I would assume not, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We got to work on compliance here. Okay, so with that being said, we will go to Chair Carlson and then Chair Davenport.
Mr. Chairman, I have a little different point of view than what the testifiers are bringing forward because, like Representative Schultz, I'm concerned about the huge health care costs. And just being that nobody else testified, I grew up in a household where my father, and I've mentioned this before, World War II vet, he went into the service and literally, for a variety of reasons, came out a chain smoker. So along with my 4 siblings, we grew up in a household with heavy tobacco smoke. Fortunately, none of us, when you talk about secondhand smoke, but I read every article that I see in the paper about secondhand smoke, and I've now made it to my 76th year without any particular problems. But I will say this, my father died, as many smokers do, from smoke-related illnesses. And not only that, he worked for the railroad, had a good job with the railroad, but had to take early retirement because his health was such, because his lungs could no longer allow him to part of his job was outside. So when he took early retirement due to health issues and smoking-related issues for the driver, that meant that both my father and mother, for the rest of their lives, had a smaller pension than what he might have had his health remained where he could have worked until a normal retirement age. So there are some costs that I think we need to talk about, and I think they have to be on the table. My only other comment, Mr. Chairman, is that when there was reference by one of the testifiers that the tax bill had passed, and I assume that that was in reference to the conference committee report with strong bipartisan support. Let's remember that was an omnibus bill. I voted for the bill at the time, but one particular provision in the bill was this very issue here. So to read into that over 100, I think we have 110 or 11 people who voted for the bill. That doesn't mean that the vote was that strong for this particular provision. I just want to put that on the table. And then I do have a question for the testifiers, and the one in particular that was speaking for the retail federation or association. How do you arrive at a position, because it looks like with what's at the bottom of the paper that was passed out, it would be mainly within the retail community, those people that sell cigarettes or benefit from the sale of cigarettes, and the retail establishment would be far beyond just the ones that are listed there that may be benefiting directly from the bill. And so my question is, how do you arrive at a position where you come in and you say the retail association supports the bill, and no doubt you've taken a position, but my question, how do you arrive at a position on any given piece of legislation, especially one like this that is ultimately very controversial?
Mr. Carr?
Mr. Chair, Representative Carlson, thank you very much for your question. To take any position on any piece of legislation or provision, our association has several different layers of processing certain bills or processing certain policies. We first start out 6 months prior to session. We go through a survey to ask our retailers what is the biggest issue they're having, what are the biggest challenges they are facing, what's the largest uncompetitive nature or competitive challenges or competitive advantages that they're seeing. We then correlate that data and we start to pare it down to a few more issues. Representative Carlson, we then send that information back out to our members. We then have more dialogue, more narrative. Representative Carlson, we then have a legislative summit where we bring all of our membership in. We have everyone around a table similar to this dais here. We have conversation on each and every policy, Representative Carlson. We then have an executive committee, Representative. That executive committee also looks at all of our policies and legislation. It then goes back to our board of directors, Representative, and then we move forward with supporting certain policies or specific pieces of legislation similar to what you see in front of you. I hope that answers your question as to how we arrive on any piece of legislation, and specifically with this individual piece of legislation.
Mr. Chairman, it does in a sense, but it doesn't really, and I don't necessarily expect you to share it. That initial survey, what percentage of the retailers said that this was an important issue? I understand, and it's an interesting process and probably a pretty deliberative one that you described. But it would be interesting to know if the retailers are saying on a list what are our most important issues, what percentage of them would have in fact listed this as a high priority, and that's probably somewhat proprietary, so I won't press that point. But at any rate, I was curious how you arrive at a decision when you say the Retailer Association supports, like I say, this bill or any given bill that they come in and support or oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Carlson. I have a question before we go to Chair Dabney, then we'll go to the department. Mr. Klayman, House File 906, how much of the money that would be saved, because now we don't have the inflator, we're not cutting the cigarette tax at all, zero. How much of the money, how much does this bill affect the tobacco companies. How much do the tobacco companies make on this bill?
Mr. Chair, I think you're referring to the where this tax is actually imposed. This is a tax that's imposed at the distributor level. So both the cigarette excise tax and the in lieu sales tax on cigarettes are imposed at the distribution level. So it would be the distributor that ultimately pays the tax.
So the tobacco company receives no benefit from this?
Well, Mr. Chair, the tobacco manufacturer who's making the cigarettes is not subject to this tax.
Chair Dabney. Then we'll go to the department. Chair Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would contend that the tobacco companies will benefit from this because of increased or continued sales that otherwise might stop, that they otherwise might lose as prices go up. Between 2010 and 2014, well, Mr. Chair, you contend that these tax changes don't make anybody quit. Between 2010 and 2014, smoking went down amongst adults, all adults, 11% in Minnesota, and between adults between the ages of 18 and 24 went down 30%. Now, I recognize that's bad business for holiday stores, and it requires them to be more thoughtful and competitive and strategic in their marketing and the products that they carry. They would rather not have to be more competitive. But at the same time, we as a state and as individuals are saving probably significant amounts of money in healthcare costs. And I think on balance, we are better off not passing a benefit along to the tobacco companies through this bill, and probably better off passing a benefit along to Minnesotans who take a look at this and start thinking about quitting. Quitting smoking, having done it myself, is awfully, awfully difficult. I did it. I did it about a dozen times, and then it finally stuck. It stuck. It stuck. Yeah, I got some practice in Representative Herdas, and then finally figured out how to do it right. That didn't help holiday stores, but it sure helped me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Dabney. Mr. Cummings from the department. And then members, we will certainly allow questions for Mr. Cummings from members, but we do have floor session at 12:15, so when we wrap it up, we'll be heading over to the floor, and I want to give people time to get over there. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Paul Cummings, and I'm the Tax Policy Manager at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. I was able to call your office yesterday, so I hope you got the message, Mr. Chair.
We did.
Seeing a reassuring yes, but maybe no.
It was so delightful.
The purpose of the cigarette tax increase in 2013 was to balance the budget, make strategic investments in healthcare, education, and economic development, and reduce smoking in Minnesota, in particular among youth. Since the increase took effect, smoking has declined, most notably among high school students. The steeper decline in smoking that happened after the tax increase didn't occur in other states that did not enact tobacco law changes comparable to the changes in Minnesota. The percent of high school students who smoked cigarettes in the past 30 days dropped from 18.1% in 2011 to 10.6% in 2014, the steepest decline ever recorded by the Minnesota Teens and Tobacco Survey. Adult smokers reported that the 2013 cigarette tax increase influenced their smoking behaviors, with 61% thinking about quitting, 48% cutting down on smoking, and 44% making quit attempts, according to the Minnesota Adult Tobacco Survey. Among smokers who successfully quit in the past year, 63% reported that it helped keep them from smoking again. Eliminating the inflator on this tax will make cigarettes more affordable for our youth who are more price sensitive years down the road. Removing the inflator over time would lower the cost of cigarettes over time in real dollars. For these reasons, Governor Dayton has been critical of this proposal in the past and continues to oppose it today. Governor Dayton and Lieutenant Governor Smith support a balanced, common sense approach in their budget that protects the state's long-term fiscal health In fiscal year 2021, the cost of this bill will be over $21 million. That figure only grows over time. It will be important to ensure long-term fiscal balance with any budget that is passed. And as with all bills, Mr. Chair, if this bill moves through the process, the Department of Revenue looks forward to working with you, Mr. Chair, and members and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to be a resource, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings, for your testimony. And I would just note that Governor Dayton did say in 2010 that he opposed increasing taxes on cigarettes. So there's a little history there, too. So, but that's probably for another day. Questions for Mr. Cummings, Representative Hertaus, Carlson, Loeffler, and then we're going to the floor. Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Cummins, thanks for the testimony. You seem to have included data that seems to be from the industry, the cigarette industry. I was wondering if you have any data that you could share since 2010, 2014 with regard to increasing the taxes on cigarettes and how that relates to revenue.
Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hertaus, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Are you asking if we have reports on the total revenue that we've collected from cigarette taxes? Is that the question?
Representative Hertaus?
Yes, that is the question. If you could reflect on what revenues have been received from taxes on cigarettes.
Mr. Cummings?
Mr. Chair, Representative Hertaus, I don't have my tax handbook here with me. Obviously the tax has increased in because of the changes made in 2013. And I can provide that information in a historical basis to the committee.
Representative Hertaus?
Thank you. I just was trying to see if whether or not increasing the taxes had suited its goal of reducing smoking.
Okay. Chair Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little bit confused because I hear Representative Dabney say we want people to smoke less tobacco. I see Representative Applebaum wants people to smoke more pot, and I'm just trying to figure out which one it is.
It's, like I said, Representative Carlson. I don't know, were you finished or?
No, it wasn't really a question.
Oh, okay. Chair Carlson.
I'll yield to Representative Applebaum.
Representative Applebaum.
He leaned forward, so I thought maybe.
Okay. His name was used, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Carlson, Representative Garofalo. I think that people are going to always smoke both cigarettes and marijuana in the state of Minnesota, and the state of Minnesota would be wise to capitalize from those Minnesotans' use in the form of tax revenues to fund important projects. Thank you.
Chair Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman,
You have the floor, Chair Carlson,
Yeah,
and Loeffler, then we're
I
heading
do
to
have
the
a
floor.
very quick question of the department, because smuggling did come up. And I know the department has had some requests on the enforcement side, and if you could refresh my memory, or the committee's memory, of what the legislative response has been and what the department might feel is still a need relative to reducing the amount of smuggling.
Mr. Cummings, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so I wanted to be clear that when we're talking about the proposals that deal with the transfer of untaxed tobacco products into the state, that we're really focusing on what we call OTP, so it's other tobacco products. When we're going out and we're finding untaxed tobacco products, we are finding the OTP, the other tobacco products, so like moist snuff or loose tobacco or other types of tobacco. In terms of cigarettes, cigarettes do a very good job because they have the cigarette stamp on them, right? So we are seeing the less type of sort of wholesale smuggling. Now, as mentioned, a taxpayer would be able to bring into the state 1 carton of cigarettes from another state, and that is legal. In terms of the proposals that the Department of Revenue is bringing forward this year, the first proposals is a set of what we believe is sort of common sense fee and penalty provisions that deal with the distributors and subjobbers. Right now, it's very easy to get a distributor or subjobber license, so we have asked that the fee be increased so that we are only providing the license to the people who are actually in the business of doing that. In addition, we've asked for the ability to stamp moist snuff. So because the cigarette stamps work so well at providing compliance related to the cigarette tax, we've asked that the stamping take place on moist snuff. That would provide an additional level there. We also have what we believe are some common sense changes related to vapor taxation, but we can leave that for another day, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, that,
I think you're right on that one.
if I may, where I
Chair
was
Carlson.
headed, because I, not currently, but last biennium, I served on state government finance, and I thought you had a request for more agents for enforcement, but maybe I'm wrong on that, because it's been a couple of years since we had that issue before state government finance. But I will stop there, Mr. Chairman, because I know we have to get across the street, so thank you.
Very much, Chair Carlson. And the last person with questions, Chair Loeffler, Representative Loeffler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just briefly, since one of the witnesses for the bill noted their allies in their handouts, I just thought I'd call attention to the Minnesotans for Smoke-Free Generation handout that's in your packet, and they represent the voices of 50 other organizations, from Children's Defense Fund, faith-based groups, health organizations, and while it was unfortunate they weren't able to testify here, I think it should be on the record that over 50 organizations look at this very differently.
And thank you for that. And that should be in your packets, members. And we did, we only had 2 folks notify us about testifying. So, of course, anybody's welcome to. With that, tomorrow we're going to be, Mr. Cummings? I will move that House File 906 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus tax bill. Thank you, Mr. Cummings, and we will be, thank you for being a resource. We will work on this together.